Good morning, everyone. Thanks, James, and to Fusion Sports for bringing me down here today. So as James said, I'm going to be talking to you guys about ACL injury and particularly about returning to play. So an overview of what I'm going to talk about today. So ACL injuries, how do they occur? Why do they occur and why do they reoccur? And what do we need to correct? And importantly, how do we measure that? And how do we test if the athlete's ready to return to play? Or can we do that well? So just briefly about me. Yeah, so currently I'm the performance physio at Cronulla Sharks in the NRL. I've got a clinical physio role as well. I'm a partner in a physio company, I suppose. So BaiMed Performance is an offshoot of BaiMed Physio, which is based on the south coast in Wollongong and around that area. And basically, we started BaiMed Performance a couple of years ago. Well, basically to try and bridge the gap between physio and sport performance. So really working around end stage rehab, as well as being a training facility for healthy athletes based on the south coast. So Wollongong is about an hour south of Sydney. Yeah, so having it as a training facility for Wollongong-based athletes that don't want to travel to Sydney. Before that, I was at the St George Dragons, also working in rugby league, and have done some other various roles, working mainly in rugby league. And I'm just starting to get into basketball, so just starting a role with the Wollongong Hawks as the performance manager there, which is just in the last few weeks. So when we're talking about bringing people back to play from ACL injury, it's important to know how they occur. So the most simplest thing, if we talk about ACL alignment, so the anatomy of the ACL, if you put your holsters in your trousers like that, so that's sort of the alignment of how the ACL sits. So posterior-superiorly on the femur, coming anteromedially onto the tibia, and the diagram there on the left, so looking at that typical pattern of femoral adduction, knee abduction, valgus obviously, and that eversion at the ankle. So that's a pretty common mechanism of injury for ACL. So just quickly, when we're talking about classifying ACL injuries, when we're bringing someone back to play, it's important to know how the person got injured. And what we sort of used to do was classify ACL injuries as contact or non-contact. And what we know now is we've probably got to subgroup those non-contact injuries a little bit more clearer. So we've got some more clear definitions. So what we're sort of proposing now is to sort of bring this new group of non-contact, indirect contact. So direct contact, we're talking about direct contact, it means direct contact to the knee or around that area. So classically, someone gets tackled around that knee, caves in and causes that injury. But contact can also be to other parts of the body. So contact up top, so putting someone off balance. And the classic non-contact, which is where a cognitive perturbation occurs. So a defender moves, change direction, so that classic non-contact, what we would associate with ACL injuries. And the other non-contact, which is basically is a non-sporting contact. So someone steps down off a step or a ladder, and something fairly innocuous like that causes injury to the ACL. Yeah. So and what Marshall in that paper proposes is to classify the indirect contact, classic non-contact, and the other non-contact into that group: non-contact, indirect contact. Yeah. So direct contact meaning contact to the knee. So we're going to look at three examples of athletes that I've worked with over the last few years. So let this play. So the fellow that we're talking about here is T-Rex, 135 kilo Tongan wrecking ball. This was last year in a Tonga Samoa test. So he was a Sharks player playing, and this is sort of their rep week. So they have a week off and play this game. So the number 12, they're about to get the ball. So I'll just let it play through. So we're looking at his left knee. We'll play through in live and then I'll slow it down so we can have a bit of a look at this. So I was in a hotel room in Mudgee watching this and crying to myself because knowing that was going to be the poor bloke that had to look after him for the next 9 to 12 months. But he's left us now. So looking at the left knee here, coming into contact, left foot gets planted there. Ashton Sims, the 13 there, has unfortunately pulled him into an extended position, so all that 135 kilos is going straight down through that left leg. Buckles there. We get a good look at this from this angle here, is probably the best. So there we go. So that trunk extended position, knees pretty straight, so around about 20 degrees of flexion. So we know between 0 and 30 degrees of knee flexion is the dangerous position. His left leg's almost fully extended, and that rotation over that leg, and that's the shot there. You can see his tibia sitting forward on his femur, almost going to pop out through the skin. So if we think about that classification system before that I was talking about, what do we think that, how do we classify that? Yeah, so indirect contact. So there's contact there, so maybe a few years ago, or even still, a lot of people would call that a contact injury. The surgeon who did that repair classified that as a contact injury. So going on now, just looking at this example of basketball player that we deal with. So coming in here, so yeah, this is Angus has had, he's had bilateral repairs, so this unfortunately he'd done before. But coming in here, left foot planted there almost in full extension. So center of pressure, so where the ground reaction force is going down through the ground is way outside his center of mass. His left leg's almost fully extended, and that's about that position there, that knee buckles and, yep, unfortunately gets injured. So again, what do we think for that, classifying that injury?
Contact, non-contact?
There's contact, but there's no contact to the knee, so there's indirect contact there. Yeah, so that's an indirect contact injury. So really using a ligament type turning pattern there, so it takes less muscular strength to plant your foot out and just turn using your joints and your ligaments, but unfortunately it puts more stress on your ligaments. So this third example here, the fellow we're looking at is this half back here. This is he's at 8 months post reco. This is sort of his first week getting back into some opposed drills. I'm standing over here somewhere shitting myself because it's probably turned out to be more of a opposed drill than what it's supposed to be. But anyway, so we watched this fellow there. Chain of events here. I'll let it play through first. So the markers have done the wrong job there. Andrew Fafita's jammed in what he's not supposed to do, so it causes this other fella, Mick Ennis, to come around there and basically, so he's coming inside, doesn't get the ball, jumps up in the air, sees this defender, comes at him, checks him, boom, left ACL. So nothing going, everything falling the wrong way there. He's checked him, extended, so all his weight going down, stiff landing, buckled. Other thing we'll talk about, the ground here is super dry. It's a sort of mid-December on the training pitch, which is another risk factor, which we'll talk about a bit later. Awful day. That's me running down there to try and do something, say something to this poor fellow who just goes and jumps in his car and drives off. So I was on the phone to the welfare guy to go to his house so he's not hanging from the rafters. But yeah, so there's some 3 examples. So what do we think for that, to classify that one? Yeah, indirect contact, yeah. So indirect contact, they're probably more common than what we think. Some people will classify those 3 injuries as contact injuries, but if we're using this way of classification, then they're all going to be indirect contact. So if we talk about the modifiable and non-modifiable factors, let's come back out here again. Yeah, so ACL injuries are fairly widespread, but if we split them into modifiable and non-modifiable factors, the modifiable factors are important to know because we can, for someone who's at risk, we can make more special consideration in our training for them. But the modifiable factors and for us, what we can do with their training, just go to the next one, mate, which is more where we're going to spend most of our time. yeah, so working on those factors, and our training can influence those areas, and particularly on the dynamic stability of the knee. Thanks, mate. So just briefly about the non-modifiable factors, and particularly for you guys with the in the sport, which is a high-risk sport, and the age group, a high-risk age group for ACL injury. We know that females are in and around 6 times more likely to injure their ACL. Other non-modifiables like notch width, ACL volume, and geometry and anatomy. It's just a little excerpt from a doctor's report from a patient that we treat talking about lateral tibial downslope. Yeah, he was advised not to return back to sport because of this, but purely because of this lateral tibial downslope. And he eventually returned to sport and unfortunately re-injured his knee despite a pretty good efforts. So the modifiable factors, so the biomechanical model, that there's some pretty strong evidence biomechanical factors are a cause of ACL injury with female athletes. It isn't as well proven with males, but definitely with females. And a lot of the work from Hewitt et al. From the States has done a lot of work, particularly about biomechanical factors and biomechanical training programs, prevention programs for female athletes, particularly adolescent female athletes. Fatigue, so physiological and mental fatigue, more for males. And we know the surface and footwear, so the greater the coefficient of friction, so drier grounds, astroturf, stuff like that. The harder the ground, the more the ground reaction force, and the bigger load on the knee. So talking about those biomechanical factors, this is straight from paper from Hewitt et al. So looking at the injury mechanism component down the left there. So knee adduction during landing. This is particularly looking at double leg landing. So knee adduction during landing, a low knee flexion, so a stiff landing, asymmetrical landings, and an inability to control your center of mass. So excess trunk sway with a jump and land. Yeah, and looking at what ways they can target that with their training. So how do we measure progress in our rehab? Yeah, the ACL performance program. So it's called, basically, because we were seeing so many ACLs, it sort of spurred my interest in it, I suppose. And we developed this program over the last sort of 5 years or so, and it's an evolving system. So I don't know how well you can see, but basically this is a report card from a young netballer that's just returned to play. She's about 12, 14 months now. So all the tests we do are down the left-hand side. I'll go into a bit more detail with them in a minute. Okay, I won't go through it there, but I'll go through the main ones in more detail in the next slides. Yeah, so that paper there from Aspetar. So they looked at six clinical discharge criteria, which was a variety of hop tests, a T agility test, and quad and hamstring strength. And they found that if the athletes, which were young soccer players, if they didn't meet that discharge criteria before they returned to sport, there was a 4 times greater risk of rupture. And we sort of base some of what we do off that with a few different twists with the gear and the facilities that we have. But that's a pretty good article to have a look at. I've got some references at the end if you want to have a look there for you then. So how do we assess strength? So strength is probably the most important thing for injury prevention and for performance, I think. We look at hip abduction with a handheld dynamometer. We look at hamstring strength, which is extremely important for ACL prevention. We test it at 30 degrees and at 90 degrees with a hamstring wedge, which I'll show you in a minute. We look at single leg squats. We look at single leg squats for control, which we'll go through in a minute, and for max reps for endurance, and as a measure of strength. We use isometric mid-thigh pull with a load cell. And how strong is strong enough? It's obviously different for every sport. Someone like T-Rex is 130 kilos, who's got blokes hanging off him in a contact sport, obviously needs to be stronger than someone in a different type of sport with less of a demand. Yeah, but we look at around 2 times body weight for males, for the guys that we deal with, which are mainly contact athletes, and about 1.5 for females. But that's not a rigid thing, that's more of a guide. And I'm going to start doing a single leg isometric squat with a Smith machine. So getting in that position there, which is basically like a leg press type position, but in a functional weight bearing type position. Yeah, so the hamstring wedge there, which is an AIS, Craig Purdom, who's a physio at the AIS, or was, who's recently retired. The load cell there coming out of the floor, so measuring the force. We'll test it. So the idea with that is it puts the hamstring in a position where it's most likely to get injured in the running position, which is out here. So we test in that position, and we do a handheld test in that same position, but with that knee flexed to 90 degrees, so outer range and inner range. And isometric mid-thigh pull there testing, which is our backyard creation of a mid-thigh pull setup, which isn't ideal, but it tends to work pretty well. So just the load cell, so fixed plug to the floor, load cell in the middle, and just measuring the force through there. So isometric mid-thigh pull is safer way to assess max strength rather than doing an RM squat or deadlift, particularly for people with a poor training history in the gym who don't know how to lift very well. So how do we assess control? As well as using the single leg squat as an endurance test, we assess single leg squat as a control measure, as a score out of 3, similar to an FMS type of score. So we look at trunk, hip and knee in the coronal and sagittal planes, so looking from the side, looking in front, which has its limitations. We've just started using the human track system, which is a biomechanical analysis system that you guys might have some familiarity with. I'm not too sure, but we go to the next slide. So I think there's a whole lot of potential with human track. The limiting factor at the moment with its knee assessment, it's only looking at knee valgus essentially. So it gives you a peak valgus score and a total combined varus valgus score. So if you're wobbling all over the place, that score will be high, and if your peak valgus is high. What it probably needs to show more importantly is what's happening at the trunk and the hip. There is modes to looking at hop and jump and stuff, but we've mucked around with it for a while, and it doesn't really match what we see. Yeah, so we're starting to use it just purely to put a number on a single leg squat rather than just trying to make it more objective rather than just being a subjective measure. So assessing power, we look at a vertical hop. So we'll do a single leg vertical hop on the jump mat. We'll do a horizontal linear hop. So straight forward, just purely in centimetres, and a horizontal lateral bound. So just out to the side. So reactive strength, this is T-Rex here, and he's probably his first single leg depth jump. We usually do them off 30 centimetres, but this is a bit lower for him. He was fairly inconsistent in his application to his rehab. That's the first time he's tried that. It looks like he's not landing very well and just trying to wrestle himself out of it. But that's a single leg depth jump, which we do, and we use RSI for that, not contact time. So RSI, jump height divided by contact time, which gives us a much better idea of their plyometric ability. Obviously, just looking at contact time, someone could have a really good contact time but have a pretty poor jump. So we use the reactive strength index for that. And we've been mucking around, which we'll show in the prac a little bit later, in doing a lateral bound to a vertical hop. So I sort of got thinking about in the clinic how I could try and find ways to try and mimic what's happening with a cut in a clinical setting, so without having a field and without having timing gates or biomechanical lab or whatever, to try and mimic that movement. So absorbing that gravity action force and changing direction. So we sort of started using a single leg depth jump to lateral bound, so this is a lateral bound to vertical hop, so transferring that lateral force into a vertical force. And we sort of started to make our own RSI measure. So a lateral RSI versus a vertical RSI, and just thinking of ways that we can try and measure this. So that's a lateral bound to vertical hop. Where we set the lateral bound distance from is what their score was from a normal lateral bound. So they'll do a lateral bound first. If they're 1.50 m, that's where they'll start their lateral bound from here. And what we're probably using a bit more now is a single leg depth jump to lateral bound, which is probably a bit closer to what a cut is. So stepping down, so similar to a cut or change of direction. That's sort of why I started to use this a little bit. And so we measure how far they go laterally and divide that by the time they spend on the mat. Yeah, so we haven't got enough sort of real data on that to see if it's relevant or not, or to show you numbers and stuff on it. But yeah, it's something we're looking to keep using to see how it correlates with other stuff. And we do a crossover triple hop for distance, which there's some pretty good evidence that it correlates well with lower limb strength and power, which is a fairly widespread tool. If anyone's got any questions, just sing out as we go.
Do you find that, although a lot of them are really good and functional, do you find that because a lot of them are triple extension movements and you're trying to assess like just the return to ACL, have you got like baseline measures that you're comparing that with, or you just unilateral?
Purely symmetry at the moment, yeah. So ideally, obviously, we'll talk about symmetry in a minute, but ideally we've got baseline for everyone, but most of the time we're not going to have that. So purely at the moment, all we're looking at is symmetry. Probably most importantly is trying to assess sport-specific movement. They progress through protocols. If they've gone through step by step and ticked all the boxes there, then we know that we can be fairly confident that they're ready to progress to the next level. And sport-specific reactive agility, so trying to bridge the gap between, which is probably the hardest bit from a physio point of view, is getting someone from the clinic to be able to go on, into the full chaotic demands of sport, particularly with AFL or netball or something like that, where there's lots of things happening. So trying to find a way to try and bridge that gap. And we've been doing a fair bit of stuff with some decision and indecision cuts and looking at symmetry and performance in that. And we'll go into that in the prac as well, but explain a little bit further here. So talking a bit about symmetry, as we spoke about before. So what is normal? What's acceptable? We talk about dominant and non-dominant limbs, but that sort of confuses things more because particularly in kicking sports, you might be a right-footed kicker, but your most stable leg is your left leg. So if the research is looking at dominant versus non-dominant, it's probably skews things a bit there as well. As we said before, having pre-injury baselines are ideal, but not possible a lot of the time. And we know that the risk for contralateral ACL injury is reported as being up to 20% risk for contralateral limb. So is that because the other leg wasn't strong enough in the first place? So if we're basing our return to play stuff on getting our injured leg as strong as the other leg, and the other leg's weaker than what it should be, then maybe we're selling ourselves short there. And the system we work is within 10% is okay, but maybe within 10% isn't enough. Maybe we need to be a bit stricter with that. And some work from Tim McGrath, who was at Port Adelaide, works in rugby league now, sort of found that within normal people, the asymmetry is probably a lot closer together. So we might need to be a bit more strict on our 10% guidelines. So we know with cuts, the load on the ACL is been reported as being 20% higher in reactive cuts or indecision cuts, however you want to term them. The position of the pelvis and trunk coming into the cut is probably most important. Ankle strength and power coming out of the cut is important. And talking about training, so isometric and concentric strength. So as well as eccentric strength to control the force with landing, it's probably just as important. Your isometric and your concentric strength gets you out of trouble in those positions. So it's good to be strong eccentrically, but maybe more importantly, we need to be strong isometrically and then concentrically to get out of those positions. Excuse me. And And the indecision cut changes the kinematics of the movement, which we'll have a look at in a minute. Was our lead S&C coach, has just gone to taking a job with the Orlando Magic in the NBA last week. So basically on the left there, he's going to do a decision cut, so a pre-planned direction change. I'll just explain the setup here. So we've got the fusion gates. The space we've got here is at the back of our clinic. We've set up an AstroTurf area, so it's not as long as what we'd like it to be. So you can't really get a whole lot of speed coming into this cut. So it's basically he's going to start here as he comes through these first gates. The timer starts. He'll go through a second set of gates. Once he goes through them, there's two other gates left and right at 45 degrees. So he's going to come into a 45-degree cut. So once he goes through the second set of gates, there'll be a flash and/or a buzz on one of those sides. You can set up for either just a visual or an auditory cue. So as he comes through the first one, the timer starts. The timer stops once he goes through either one of those gates at the end. So if we look at the kinematics of the cut, so basically if we look at him coming into the cut, it's not a perfect cut by any means, but it's pretty good. If we look at the trunk lean coming in, if we say like a motorbike going around a turn, they'll drop that inside shoulder and lean into it. They won't be tall and coming out of it this way. So Nate's pretty good there. And as he makes that turn, there's a pretty good angle going down, so his foot's not left behind him too much. But he's got a few meters to. So what we'll measure there as well as the performance of. So we'll set up a camera as it is now, and stop and play that back to them and try and iron out some kinks or tell them. Give them some feedback as to how that movement can be better. But as a performance measure, the time, so time of a left v right decision cut and time left v right for an indecision cut, and comparing the decision and the indecision cut is something that we can do as well. And obviously, if you've got more of a length of space, you can get up some more speed and make it more of a game-like situation. And obviously there'd be a progression of training where we're building up to this from early stages, just teaching them how to decelerate on that leg, and then building into this as a real end stage sort of thing. So we look at psychological readiness as well. So we know that psychological readiness is a really important factor in returning to sport. So we get our patients to complete the ACL RSI questionnaire. We also use the KOOS, so the knee osteoarthritis outcome score. We've just started to do that and starting to try and send it out to get some ongoing info about how everyone's going down the track. And when to return, so different surgeons will give different protocols, sort of ranging from 6 months at the most aggressive to 2 years in some cases. This is just looking at ligamentization, so the time that it takes for ligaments to actually become ligaments again and get revascularized and stuff like that. We see there's not a whole lot of ligament maturation happening. Definitely from in that study in the blue, there's the most earliest, which is at 9 months, and then in excess of 12 to 24 months while that ligament's still maturing. So we know the further that we can delay return to sport, the more likely that the person's going to have success. So that's something to think about. Yeah, so I mean, ACLs now, it's pretty rare before any of our guys will go back before 9 months, and most of them are probably 12 months or more, particularly in the clinic setting, just because they haven't got the training history, and they've got a lot more work to do before they're at a level that we can be confident that they're going to have a good chance. This is just an example of a rehab program, so going through the stages, which we don't have to spend too much time on there. It's basically giving them a rundown of what they can expect through each phase. This is an example of a rehab program, a rehab planner, a rehab outline for that basketball player that we looked at before. Just giving him an idea of what he can expect throughout the stages, correctives, strength, off-feet conditioning, and some outcome measures there on the final column. Yeah, that's about it for the theory component. We'll go outside afterwards and have a practice of some of those cuts and some of those depth jump stuff we're looking at before. If anyone wants any more information on any of that stuff, I'll be happy to talk about it or send you information or give you my details or anything later on. Great.
Beautiful.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dan.